Attention on deck. Welcome to the Warships podcast with your hosts, Kellord, Kami Samurai, and Vanacera.
Hello and welcome to episode 75 of the Warships podcast. I'm your host, Kellord, and today Kami and I welcome Yuzral back to the show. So how fare the European YouTube seas, Yuz?
They are violent, bloody, swimming with torpedoes, and swarming with aircraft. Business as usual.
They're not salty?
Oh, I thought that was a given. I mean, there's salty, and then there's I just had a detonation salty. I mean, what are we counting here?
So today is actually kind of a red letter day for us. It's 3/4 of 100 episodes. So that's a pretty significant milestone for us.
Woo! I'm sorry, it seemed to call for that.
Fair enough. We appreciate it. So when I was looking back at the first time we had you on the show in episode 53, I noticed that we had you right on the midst of the kind of the tragic release of Graf Zeppelin. It's been 7 months later, and we have what's purported to be the final version of the ship in testing, a ship that I've played quite a bit over the last few weeks. Did you ever expect it to take this long to come out with a completed ship, Hughes?
I expected it to take a long time. I was never, ever prepared to put a timer on it because given just how big an explosion, how big a fire, how colossal a hot mess they had to clean up in that initial Gamescom launch, Wargaming were always going to play it ultra safe with Graf Zepp. So I'm not surprised it's taken 6 months. I'm not surprised that they have tried just about everything but the kitchen sink. And I think it's very definitely them learning from a very bad experience. But
I feel that they got their fingers burned real bad. Real bad.
Fingers, hand, wrist, forearm, possibly up to the shoulder. Yeah, I don't think anyone will argue that.
Honestly, I'm also pretty happy with where Graf Zeppelin ended up. I wish it was a little bit more forgiving because I feel like it's a really fun thing to play, but it's not forgiving at all. It's not forgiving to, especially to a newer player. If you make a mistake with your fighters early on in the match, you are hosed.
Yeah, I will agree with you that the phrase that's kept running through my mind all the way through this last round of testing is that she's more like Kaga than Kaga. By that, I mean she is an air-to-the-ground monster if the enemy can't run air defense, if they can't run fighter control. But if they can, or if, as you say, you make a mistake in her, good luck, because you're going to be dancing a foxtrot in uniform for the next 15 minutes, and your team will rightly be blaming you for it.
The funny thing is that the other day I was having a discussion with your SAT score actually on our Discord, and we were talking about the fact that Asashio, which we'll talk about in a minute, is very dependent on the matchmaking that she gets to determine how effective she is in the match. And so I brought up, and he was talking about how that was a negative against Asashio. I was like, well, go talk to the carriers. I mean, if you take Graf Zeppelin and you get a Lexington on the enemy team, you're in for a good day. But if you get an Enterprise on the enemy team, you're in for a real bad day.
I would agree with that to an extent. I mean, there are certainly the only two carriers I'm happy to see when I've been in Graf Zepp are Alexei and another Graf Zepp. If I see an Enterprise, if I see a Shokaku 222 or 312, it's kind of...
A Shokaku 222 is dealable. It's not easy.
Yeah, no.
But you can. It doesn't have enough fighter power to wreck you. Like the Enterprise can just attrition the crap out of you because of how many fighters it has in its deck.
The fact that Enterprise has got such deep pockets, yeah, as you say, she can just trade fighters. I think Enterprise can lose fighters 2 to your 1 against a Graf Zepp, and she will still win the air war. Her fighter reserves are that deep.
If you are twice as good as the enemy Enterprise player, twice as good, you still lose.
Maybe. There is a high differential, and unfortunately the nature of the carriers is that they're so specialized that anyone who's gone out and bought an Enterprise probably has a pretty good idea of what they're doing at this stage. I mean, I think we're at the point where a lot of the newbies have come in, seen Enterprise, gone for the name, and then got their fingers scorched and decided, you know what, I'm going to come back to this when I actually know what I'm doing. But yeah,
I mean,
Enterprises,
bad players are going to be bad.
Enterprise is nasty. Shokaku is nasty. It brings back the whole issue of the carrier skill gap. And the fact that because there's only one carrier in a tier 8 match at most, if one team's got a Unicum and the other team's got a potato, it's not going to end well for the side that's got the bad luck on the matchmaker.
Well, one thing I will say is that Graf Zeppelin retains its striking power in a tier 10 match much better than Enterprise does, and even better than Shokaku does, in my opinion. Because like the things that it can do to tier 10 ships are very nasty. The AP bombs in particular. I really feel like Graf Zeppelin is the best up tiering of any of the tier 8 carriers.
To an extent, I will agree with you. In normal random play, on the occasions that I've had to deal with a coordinated flak blob, then frankly, I would rather have had Enterprise or Shokaku because they've got the extra range on the torpedoes and they can stand off and not have to deal with close range flak. Graf has always got to run that risk. But normally, randoms, you get the occasional battleship wandering off and it's kind of, nom nom, thank you. I'll just have your health points. I would say in randoms, she up tiers better. In competitive, I am less convinced.
Oh, a competitive, she's not a competitive carrier at all, in my opinion. It's too easy to lose the air war. So we've covered the upcoming French battleships in quite a bit of depth on the podcast over the last few weeks. But I think it'd be interesting if you could give us just a quick impression of what your experience has been with the French battleships as testing of them. And then I guess give a quick thoughts on the manner of their release with these missions and the loot boxes and things like that.
Okay, so starting with the line as a whole, 3 and 4 are forgettable, honestly. 5, the Britannia, feels like very much like the New York. If that was the comparison that kept coming up in my head. I think a lot of other people were saying, yeah, I mean, ABP XY turrets, 300 plus mil guns, feels very like New York, handles very like New York, crawls along at about the same pace as a New York. Still need to get the midshipmen to get out and push to get anywhere on time. The 6, the Normandy, is where things start getting interesting because that's where we get the quad turrets. The Leon is a high point in the line just because 16 barrels of that thing is a bit too much fun in my opinion. And then 8, Super Dunkirk, the Richelieu. 9 and 10 are interesting. They head back towards mostly traditional battleship design, the Alsace in particular with the ABX design. And of course, the Republique is, a lot of people have compared it to a supersized Graf Spee with that AB turret setup. And I can kind of see where they're coming from that. As a whole, the line feels like a 10, 12 kilometer mid-range. I'm tempted to use the phrase defensive linesman, if you want to borrow a sporting analogy.
Are you actually talking like American football defensive linemen, or are you talking European football?
We don't have defensive linesmen in European football.
I didn't think so, but I was surprised that you used the term defensive lineman as a European. That's all.
Well, just because you guys haven't embraced the glory that is rugby doesn't mean we can't borrow a few terms here and there.
Fair enough.
But despite the really nice secondaries you get on the Alsace and the Republique, she's not that's not a close assault line at all, not like the Germans are. The Citadel armor just can't take the hits, and of course they've got the above water citadels. So you look at those secondaries on the Alsace, on the Republique, it's tempting to go and say, woohoo, 10 kilometer secondaries, right, get up, get close, get the Dakar going, because they're all high explosive, which is a nice touch from wargaming. And then you just start eating armor piercing through the belt at close range. So, yeah, that's where I think she's happiest, just sitting back at 10, holding the line, stopping anything getting through, and just wearing the enemy down.
Is that kind of what your thought was too on those ships, Kami, or did you play them a little differently?
What, the French battleships?
Yeah.
I played them pretty much like any other battleship. I shot AP and wrecked things, and I don't know. I The only battleships that on this game that I played differently have been the British battleships. I feel like they're the only ones that are significantly different than the other ones, just because, of their AP and then, their propensity to shoot HE. But, as the French battleships go, I feel like using their speed is an advantage, but I don't know. I didn't find any place where I played them 100% differently, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. Then, as he says, they're not like the British with that outlying high explosive performance, or like the Germans with that near impenetrable turtleback. They play. Yeah, I think if you play them like the Americans, like the Japanese, you'll have a good starting point with them.
Fair enough. So I was watching your video on Asashio this morning, and you got me good at the end of the video when you used a new term, the A-poi-calypse. Did you coin that, Yuzral? And where did that come from?
The A-poi-calypse. I'm not sure if I coined it, and certainly it's just a joke on apocalypse. I mean, it's one letter different. So yeah, I don't know if I'm the first person to use it, but I've certainly used it a fair bit whenever anyone's come up with a scenario that involves introducing Yudachi to the game. Mostly because you just know how a chunk of the community is going to react. So I don't think I'm the first. I can't actually remember when I first started using it or heard of it.
Fair enough. So the dev blog on Facebook offered up some buffs for Harakaze and Asashio, as well as a slight nerf to Asashio's torps in terms of their detectability. As you stated in your recent video that we were just talking about, this improves the artillery on both ships to that of a Kagero. So leaving the Harakaze aside for just a minute, which I honestly use the 100mm guns on anyway.
Yeah.
How big of a change for Asashio is this anyway? I mean, like, I use the guns a fair amount when I've been playing Asashio, but I don't use them for maybe the first 10 minutes of the match, because I use them only when I see something that's worth me exposing myself to shoot.
And it's that respect, because that's how IGN destroyer gunplay tends to work. Going up to Harakaze, I crunched the numbers when I was doing the prep work for the video. It's something like a 28% boost in her firepower, and that's not counting time lost to the turret traverse. Prior to it, the only destroyer Asashio could reliably outgun was the Shinonome down at tier 6.
Well, you could theoretically do, if you're going to talk about Shinonome at tier 6, you can also talk about Fubuki at tier 6 that only has the 2 double turrets.
Yeah, and broadside, you're correct to point out that she outguns Fubuki. However, if you're chasing a Fubuki, Bucky actually outguns Asashio because she's got the quicker fire rate, and it's 2 barrels each. In terms of practical opinion, I think I'm just going to repeat what I said in my video. It means that getting into a gunfight in Asashio has gone from being total suicide to being merely a very bad idea. The guns are still for blindsiding targets, putting down ships on their last few thousand health, and in a pinch, putting down cover fires you're disengaging and running away from a gunfight you don't like the look of. But I still wouldn't get close quarters with her, and I still wouldn't engage in a one-on-one gunfight out of choice. So it's an improvement, and it's a welcome one, and it's one she probably needed, but it's not a major game changer. You're still not going to be getting trigger happy in this girl.
So I guess the thing about Asashio is that, like, I honestly, I found that your conspiracy theory, for the lack of a better term, of changing her and putting her into the line with the Akizuki and expanding that secondary IJN line to 10. I find that to be a very compelling idea, but I just don't see Wargaming changing up Asashio at this point by that much, if that makes sense.
Honestly, I'm inclined to agree with you. They seem pretty solid on the idea of Asashio as a premium and expanding the sub-branch if they ever do in some other fashion. A lot of people, and again, I'm not the first person to bring this idea up, a lot of people have pointed out that Asashio is the nameship of her class, and normally those go in the tech tree. And that is an idea that has come up basically ever since Asashio was first announced, I think, and a few people were punting the idea about when the sub-branch was first introduced, because it does finish up that sub-branch very nicely. You put Asashio in at 8, modifying her for a gunboat performance. You bump Akazuki up to 9, and you put in Project V7, the Super Akazuki that they designed but never built, at tier 10, and it just rounds out the line in a fairly natural fashion, and you only have to use one paper ship to do it. Wargaming have taken a different tack. I don't know why. We're not privy to that discussion. It's just a case of saying, hey, here's an alternative suggestion, and you can still put in either the old tier 8 Fubuki as either an Iron Army or one of the other Akatsuki classes, or you can bring in a premium Shiratsu to fulfill the oddball torpedo ninja role. So, do I think it's going to happen? Well, not particularly. Would I like it to happen? Oh, yes.
I think that the other thing you talked about is what kind of the simpler suggestion was lowering the damage on the torps and letting them hit cruisers. Yeah, and I think that that's actually probably a pretty that's something I would see Wargaming at least experimenting with, and the reason that I think that's kind of necessary is I'm not as much as fun as I've been having in Asashio, I'm not really a fan of having two different kinds of deep water torpedoes in the game. I don't want people to be playing the Pan-Asian destroyers, buy an Asashio because they see it has deep water torpedoes, and then not really realize that they can't hit cruisers with them.
I'd like to say that the average player base has got more brains than that, but honestly, after 2 years of World of Warships, I'm really not making any assumptions whatsoever on that front. My concern is not so much that, it's just the fact that it means that along with her, frankly, abysmal flak, there are two significant, one major class and one occasional, that are effectively hard counters to Asashio. She cannot fight a carrier. You just park a fighter squad overhead, and that's a mission kill until something scrapes the peeping toms off her. And of course, if she can't torpedo a cruiser, and even with the artillery upgrades she's getting, she can't really get into a gunfight with one, then what are you going to do if, any cruiser decides to muscle into a control point, except either sink or run? And I'm not too happy at that position, because when you've got 3, 4, 5 cruisers in a game, okay, that's 3, 4, 5 ships that you just can't have. You just don't have a chance against.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess, kind of flipping the questions on its head, there are very few destroyers in the game that do have any chance of living against a carrier in that manner. Once you get to the kind of the higher tiers, the lower tier carriers, I think, are much more vulnerable to flanking DDs and things like that in ways that the higher tier carriers just are not. Yeah. Because they can spot them too far out for them to be able to kind of do the final rush to go kill that carrier. I tried it in Asashio when I had no choice, and it just did not. There was no way that it was going to happen, and I knew that from the second that I tried. But it was worth. It was a test ship. I was testing, quote unquote. So I guess in that sense, I don't see that as a knock against Asashio in particular, because it's not a concern that is only something that Asashio sees. No. Now, the cruiser one I see as a little bit more of a that's kind of a knock against the Asashio, and not having a way to fight destroyers, I'm totally okay with that. Like, she has the concealment to make that work. She even has the concealment to avoid cruisers if she has to. As long as she's aware of radar and things like that. But the problem I have is that, like, what do you like? Your guns will hurt a destroyer because the destroyer has a few enough hit points, and your alpha is high enough. If they have a low health, I've killed Gearings, I've killed Fletchers, I've killed lots of things with the guns on the Asashio when later in the game because I had a health advantage and I could alpha them down. But you're right, the cruisers are just you have no option but to run.
Yeah, and at least with surface running and Pan-Asian torpedoes as well, you can at least dump some fish to give them second thoughts. Asashio, it's just, nope, not happening, gone, see ya, I'm out of here. So, yeah, I am of the opinion that, as I said, pull back the damage. I said about 3,000. I think Zoop was pitching at 5,000. Cut them right back to 16,000 damage, which is down to low tier 8, mid tier 7 levels. And again, Can they hit cruisers? Well, maybe. But at the moment, as I say, cruisers are a hard counter to Asashio. There's just nothing she can do to fight them at the moment.
Even if they like, she can't. And I would agree that it kind of makes her kind of a gimmicky little ship. I still think she's a fun ship to play. And I think that she would do okay if she were released as she were right now. Like, it would not be the end of the world. She's not going to be the best premium out there, but she's nowhere near the worst.
I would be inclined to agree with you. I mean, as you say, she is a fun little boat. She needs to be handled very carefully. She is an old school hardcore torpedo ninja. And if you were playing the Japanese destroyer lines back before the great reworking, I think it was about patch 5.3, 0.5.3 to be more accurate, then you'll recognize a lot about her. But I think the meta's moved on to an extent, and it now very definitely favors the universal destroyers and, to a lesser extent, the gunboats. The torpedo ninjas are... Well, there are too many ways to counter them these days.
I posted some stuff on the EU forums, and they actually, there was a really, really vehement response from a subsection of the people that read my post and that started posting on it. It's actually gone kind of crazy, and I unexpectedly. But there was a sentiment that the ship should be deleted from the game files, which I don't see it. Like, what's the argument there, Yuzral? I don't see why people are so upset about it. I just don't get it.
I'm going to go and have a look at the EU version of your thread, because I hadn't actually seen that. I'd only looked at the North American version. I must admit, I think a lot of people have got torpedo trauma. Is that a good term? The notion of...
It's the only one I can think of.
Yeah. I mean, just the horrible memories. I'm not even sure how many people are still playing and remember the old happy times of the first few months after beta, where it really was torpedo soup, and it really was good luck and constantly on the rudder and constant paranoia for the battleships. But yeah, I'll take a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, just quickly skim through the version of your thread on the EU.
The kind of the condensed, the Cliff Note version is just that people are worried about skill walls, because just the number of torps they can deliver at the same time, which I don't get, because Shiratsuyu and Kagero essentially have the same capability. And they're worried that people are going to, it's going to be like everybody, like everybody's going to be in Asashio, and then there's going to be no battleships, and they're not going to do anything.
No. If everyone goes into Asashio, then the team with a Benson or a Kagero is going to have a colossal advantage in the position game. But I take your point about it. Though quite a lot of people were unhappy with the suggestion. Again, some other people, Inferial points out that he met an Asashio and, to quote, wrecked him thoroughly, unquote. And he still believes that the only reason that people are doing well in Asashio is that people haven't realized that it's deep water and they can just close her down in a destroyer or a cruiser with little or no risk. What is it going to be? Yeah, it's always going to be divisive. Just the simple notion in some people's heads of 20-kilometer torpedoes, 16-kilometer torpedoes, is enough to make people start running for the hills. I mean, what a lot of people forget is that past about 12, 15 kilometers, the spread is so wide that you could almost park a battleship broadside and not take more than one hit.
There's actually been some people that are a little upset about that. It's not an even. It's that at longer ranges, those torpedo launchers don't appear to have an even spread.
There is an element of random number god in the torpedo arcs, and always has been. I believe each torpedo has a little individual sector within the cone that they launch down, and there's some RNGesus within that. but it's just more noticeable once you're past 12, 15 kilometers, because even a tenth of a degree starts adding up quite rapidly. I think people are noticing it because it's not launching at 5 or 6 kilometers anymore.
Yeah. Well, I guess another question for you, Yuzral, is there any reason not to take torpedo acceleration on Asashio? Because I think that my suggestion wasn't to lower the damage on her torps to let them hit cruisers. It was to lower the range to something like 15, 16 kilometers, because then you actually have to make a conscious choice of whether or not torpedo acceleration is good or not. Because at 20 kilometers, what use do you have for torpedoes between 16 and 20 kilometers, really? I mean, I don't like you're not going to really hit much at those ranges. So what's the downside to taking torpedo acceleration? There's none, in my opinion.
And I'm inclined to agree with you. There's also the simple point that Asashio's draw distance is 16 kilometers or thereabouts. So that 16 to 20 bracket, you literally can't see what's there when you pull the trigger. The whole point about that long range is twofold. Firstly, of course, it lets you stand off out past the 12-kilometer radar range of the Russian cruisers, which normally you have to take a risk and you have to get within to put even a standoff shot down from something like, say, a Shimakaze with the 93 Mod 2s, I think it is their 12-kilometer torp. And then you've got the F3 Murderfish, where you have to get really close. So you can do that. You can stand off in Asashio. You also have what I call follow-on, or follow through, whereby you launch and, okay, you miss your primary target, but then it's still running. So if you get a death ball, say 3 or 4 battleships clumped up and overlapping their flak, their secondaries, maybe there's a radar cruiser with them by way of an escort, most destroyers are going to look at that and go, okay, I'm not really happy about engaging that formation. And Asashio just goes, right, target practice. Is there a reason not to take torpedo acceleration? Well, if you haven't got 3 points spare, that's about the only reason I can think of. So if they do nerf the range, as you say, to make torpedo acceleration a meaningful choice, then that opens up some very interesting possibilities, because especially if they cut it down to, I would say, around about 14 kilometers. Because at that point, if you take torpedo acceleration, you drop your launch range to inside Russian radar range. So you're suddenly running that bit more risk to get the extra speed.
So if they keep the damage high at around the 20K march, is that enough of a disadvantage to let them hit cruisers, in your opinion? Or do they need a damage nerf in addition to that?
I would say it's a very hard one to call. It's an edge case. The reason for the damage nerf is because with the 5 seconds warning, 4.6 seconds warning with acceleration that you get, it's enough that a cruiser that's not got some form of preemptive active torpedo defense up, be it WSD hacks, hydro, or catapult planes up, is going to take, well, 1, maybe 2 hits, and that might be enough to sink or at least almost sink a cruiser. So that's the logic behind the damage nerf, so that the cruiser can potentially take a few more hits if it gets caught on the hop. I mean, you might argue that any cruiser that gets caught on the hop in an 8-10 bracket deserves exactly what they get, but that's a point for testing.
Is there a more unforgiving ship bracket than the 8 to 10 cruiser bracket? I mean, there are so many instant death things for them.
I'm tempted to say any tier 7 that runs into a Musashi might disagree with you there. Yeah, 7-9's pretty nasty if you're at the bottom of it. But you're right, 8 to 10 of the common brackets is not a nice one to be in if you're a tier 8 cruiser or even a tier 9. The tier 10s, well, you've got things like the battleship Moskva and the Hindenburg that can make a couple of mistakes and maybe survive to talk about it. As I say, it's an edge case. I wouldn't necessarily slice them all the way down to 15 or 16,000, but I would certainly try and test it with both. See what happens.
So moving on, the devblog also announced a major cap zone change for the Northern Lights map, eliminating the D is for don't cap and the A cap, and in place of the A cap, we get 2 offset ones that are pre-capped for each side. on the west side, the A side cap of the map. This is only going to be on the Northern Lights map to differentiate from the North map, both of which we would see, which got seen if you were in the ranked season. I'm really kind of two minds about this, as the A cap was kind of an important foothold for both teams. Yet I can't help but be happy to see the elimination of the D cap. And the other thing for me that I'm really equivocating on is that it's really not clear if the spawn locations are going to change, as if they leave them the way they are, you really have some interesting choices to make as a team, given that the caps are kind of preloaded to the west side of the map.
Yeah. I think what we're going to see probably is a lot of activity around C with some probes through the 1-2 line up the western side, trying to grab the enemy's other cap and defend it. As you say, the removal of decap means that the 10 line has even less value than it already did. But you might see aircraft trying and using it as a way of getting bombers around the flank, or an enterprising Russian destroyer trying to sneak around that way as well. But given that B tends to be a suicide move at the start of a game on this, I think what we're going to see is an AC split from both sides.
In that case, what's the difference from the 4 cap ABCD across the middle of the map? Because in doing this, they're trying to change the way the behavior is on this particular map.
Mm-hmm.
So if that is the case, why do this? Because if they really are going to be around the 1-2 line and then the whatever the 7-8 line, that's basically what happens in most North maps anyway, except for the people that want to take themselves out of the game and take them to go to D. Is this simply a way to try and get the noobs to stop going to D, or is this truly a way to try and change the way the map plays? Because I would prefer the latter than the former.
I think they are trying to change how the map plays. I mean, that's the only reason you tinker with the map. Do I think it's going to succeed is another question entirely, because, as we just said, okay, D's out, and that will hopefully discourage some of the more special players from trying to take it. On the other hand, I've seen games swing on point D from time to time. Just because one side got a fast destroyer down there, it was unopposed because everyone went, herder, only idiots go to D, and oh wait, look, we're suddenly down 2 caps to 1 or 3 caps to 1, or it's a 2-1 split with the third one locked. So I've seen D play a pivotal role in some games. No question about that. But you're right in that it does tend to be a case of, that's not where the action gets decided. It will be interesting to see a heat map of the ships after a couple of months of play on this map and see if it does differ to North.
I haven't actually seen them come out with any of those. I would be very interested to see those for a lot of the different maps if we ever get our hands on it.
Absolutely.
I guess, Kami, have you taken a look at these changes to the Northern Lights map, and is it more of like a WTF thing for you, Kami, or is it more of a I'm looking forward to trying that out?
I'm glad D's gone. I mean, I complain about it at least once a day when I stream that, people go to D.
that seems low, Kami.
Well, because to be honest with you, I don't see North very often. But when I do, I saw it the other day, and there was a Conqueror and a GK and 2 DDs on the enemy team got spotted headed that way. And I'm just like, cool, they're out of the game. But it's going to be interesting to see how many people still go over there, because if you're in a ship that's quick, Khabarovsk, anything like that, or maybe even a French battleship, you could still make pretty good time over there. Now, is it recommended? I don't think so, because there's no objective over there. But if you're trying to say the game's developing and you can maybe get a flank shot, maybe you go that way. But I mean, that kind of just I feel like it makes a dead part of the map because the spawns are still in the middle. I think C is going to be a hotly contested area like it has been. I'm not entirely sure about what it does to the A side, because I know playing it on the way it is now, I like to take the division over there and just kind of, wreak havoc at the A side. But now with the split spawns proposed, I'm not sure how it's going to play because you don't really need to go up to the big island anymore. You kind of can sit farther back, but that plays differently for other ships. Like the Des Moines likes to go up to that island, whereas, a Hindenburg doesn't. So I don't know.
I guess my question for you, Kami, real quick is it like, because normally we see the pre-captured spawns be kind of the center of your spawn location for your team, and thus they're relatively difficult to take early on in the map in a match like this. But this isn't the case in this map. Those spawns are on the extreme edge of one side of your team. Is it going to be how valid is the tactic going to be for the enemy team to try and rush the enemy's pre-captured spawn?
Well, I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be as profitable as you may think. Just because if you commit to going to get that cap, all the team that is defending that cap can rotate all their ships back pretty quickly because it's pretty close to where you spawn. So even if you go to C and you're in a battleship, you can shoot that cap from where where you would go to position yourself to help C. So I don't know if rushing that cap is the way it's going to be. Now, as the game develops and say you're 10 minutes in, if the game lasts that long, because games haven't been lasting that long, sadly. But depending on where the enemy ships are positioned, you could probably start moving a destroyer and some support ships around that way. But at the beginning of the game, I really wouldn't expect to see a lot of successful, attempts to capture the other pre-cap spot, just because the defending team, if they're paying attention, can react so quickly and destroy those ships that are coming around that corner. But it's going to be interesting to see because I already know we're going to get into a game and there's going to be that one destroyer. It's like, I'm going to go cap the capped base. And you're like, you're going to end up dying to a radar cruise. And they're like, no, I'm good. And they go around and they die. And then they complain that their team didn't help them.
I'm inclined to agree with that to an extent. I mean, what I can see happening on what was the A side is that we're going to see a couple of probes from stealthy destroyers just trying to maybe get around. I mean, honestly, I can see Asashio trying to push that flank. Just get round, start dumping long-range torpedoes into the death balls that are probably going to form north and south of B, as both sides just start trading shots over no man's land. And Asashio and maybe even Ashimikaze are going to have some fun if they can get up on that position. Not necessarily cap, because that will blow what they're doing, but suddenly having 15 torpedoes ripping west to east across your battle line is going to cause some pretty nasty disarray in that situation.
I guess one of the things that I'm worried about is that one of the ways to break open the North map, by definition, because of the way that the islands are separated, tends to be a relatively static game because pushing across the map is very difficult. Yeah. My concern is that one of the ways to break it open was always the A cap. That was why I always like to go the A cap side, is because that's the way that you can break that map open. You can't do it on the east flank. You can only do it on the west flank. Going through what used to be the C cap was always an iffy proposition because once you're through, nobody can help you from your side anymore. So if the caps are pre-capped on the A side, doesn't that make this map more static than it is?
I think it does, but it also tends to pack the fleets into a smaller area. So whereas normally you have cluster at A, cluster at B, C, and maybe a couple of people vainly trying to get through D, now you're going to see a big cluster at north, south of B and C, because as Kami pointed out, they can very quickly switch fire onto what used to be A if there's something that triggers that. But as a consequence, you're leaving the 1 and the 10 lines relatively uncovered. And okay, the 10 line's going to be low traffic. I can see planes trying to get bombing raids around the flank through there. But if you leave the 1-2 lines undefended because you're thinking, yeah, I can do that, then yeah, you can just put a torpedo destroyer down that flank. It's open water. There's plenty of room to maneuver. And whoever wins that flanking battle is going to force the enemy team to start spreading themselves a bit thinner. And that then opens up a push down through, well, really C in the mid-game. So I think initial games are going to be, I don't know, the Warship equivalent of trench warfare in classic North fashion. It's the mid-late game that's going to get changed up.
Yeah, I just worry that we have enough static stuff in the game already that this change might make that worse. So, I mean, we'll see how it plays out. We'll see what they do. But
Yeah.
Well,
what do you think?
Real quick, I think I do get your point there. I still think there's going to be like deep destroyer sparring over there.
Oh yeah.
I just don't think there's going to be a lot of. I don't think there's going to be capital ships over there to begin with.
I completely agree. I don't see any reason for a heavy on that arrangement to come off to go west of the 3-4 line or east of the 8-9 line, basically the BC corridor.
But but that's kind of my point, is that if the capital ships don't push there, where can they push? You can't push capital ships through the other choke points.
No, and I think that's well, there is the old decap, yes, but as I mentioned, I suspect that's going to turn into Bomber Alley because, hey, no one's going to take a ship over there, right? Because there's no cap anymore. So, hey, no preemptive spotting or running into flak. Except both sides now have the same problem. Both sides have now got the same tools to solve it. I think that's what Wargaming are deliberately engineering. As I said, I would love to see heat maps of where the ships are going, where the action's going on North at the moment, and after a few months of Northern Lights as well with this new layout. See if it really does change anything. But yeah, you're right, it could backfire, it could go completely static on us. And okay, there's nothing wrong with a good old-fashioned artillery duel, but it gets stale after a while.
Well, I mean, we have people that complain about battleships and sit in the back. I mean, how many times do you complain about that a day on your stream, Kami?
Depends on if I'm trying to farm damage off them or not. But
yes. That's why they invented long-range torpedoes, AP dive bombers, and high explosive.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see it, like you guys said, how the map plays out. Because right now, just looking at it, I mean, the D line, the 9 and 10, there's no real point to go over there. There's no cap over there. And then with the pre-capped, I mean, you kind of force the ships into 5 or 6 lines if you look at it on the map, and it's going to be who can spread out and get an advantage. But when you look at it, where do you get the advantage? And I think that's going to be the interesting thing on how this map plays out, because you can still go over to the old A cap. It's just if the enemy team sends ships over to you're going to be just it's going to be a stalemate for a while, and then it's going to be where can a team get around on a flank. And I mean, really what it's kind of forcing teams to do is kind of look at that where that old despawn was and be like, if we send a couple ships down this way, can they get around and start hammering those guys that are sitting around the island at sea? But if there's a carrier or something in the game, you're not going to be able to do that because they'll get spotted and teams can readjust. So there's a lot that's going to happen that we just got to wait and see how the map plays. But I feel like there's going to be a lot of sitting for the first half of the game from most people, especially experienced people that understand that that cap is doing its work. If we can get control of another cap, we control the map, because B and C are not easy to get into on that map, especially if teams are set up. And the way it's designed now, in the new configuration, it's going to be even more packed with ships. I mean, if a DD gets spotted going into B, good luck getting out of there with as many.
They're dead.
Yeah.
They're dead.
Same with C. I mean, if there's a Des Moines or something, a Minotaur sitting on one of those corners, I mean, good luck. I mean, truly.
Well, the other thing, Kami, is that they changed the B, quote unquote, B and C caps, the old B and C caps. So they're slightly smaller and slightly differently positioned. So there's less areas that you can cap while being 100% safe from the enemy team.
Absolutely.
So like that little peninsula that jutted into sea that you could sit somebody on the south side or the north side and cap it, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, and equally that little ledge at the northern end of B has more or less gone as well. There's a tiny little corner, but I don't think there's enough room to hide even a destroyer there anymore. I must admit, one idea that did just occur to me, if you look at the map at the moment, you see where the red circle is at the moment on the 3-4 line. How do you think it would change the gameplay if that circle moved east onto the 9-10 line? So where D was, but about 20 kilometers south.
So you're saying like it would be kind of like a diagonal, kind of like.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say about that is I think you'd have to shift the map over the whole, like all the islands over a whole square. So because if you look at the 9-10 line, there's not a lot of room down there, but you get 2 full lines on the 1-2 line of open water. So I think that could potentially work, but you'd have to shift the islands over.
Yeah, I do wonder if that's deliberate by Wargaming. So you've got that nice chunk of open water on the 1-3 line. But as you say, the 9-10 line is close quarters. There's next to no maneuvering room on it. And I do wonder if that's deliberate. And given that every time we've talked about this, we keep coming back to this conclusion that it may not change much, I have to wonder if the problem is not the cap points, but the map geography itself.
It could be. And that idea that you have is kind of interesting. The only thing I would see about it is I would think it would give the South team a decided advantage. Because how would that cap would be easily defended with that, with that narrow, one line of water. Whereas the other cap, even though it is on their side of the map, it's in open water, if that makes sense. And it's easier to get
You've got the open water approach. Yeah. You can, it's a lot easier to run a stealthy destroyer up to it. Whereas on the 9-10 line, as you pointed out, even a Japanese destroyer is going to have trouble staying unspotted there. So, yeah, I take your point. If they did do that, they would need to shunt everything about 1 grid square west.
So if we're going to go hypothetical on you guys, I've got a hypothetical. What if they put the green and the red squares in the diamond formation we see on some of the other maps, so that it's halfway between the BC caps?
Now here's an idea. Looking at it, what they could do, if they were to leave the original caps where they were, north of the island, south of the island, and then take the B cap and move it over to the next gap, the gap on the 4 line, then you would have that diamond shape, and that would still leave the A cap, the old A cap in play, and that would still leave, if you wanted to, the 9-10 as the game developed in play, and you would have kind of a diamond shape, and you'd be able to fight in different islands if you had to as a DD, and it would make the diamond more, I guess, succinct would be the word I'm looking for.
The other interesting...
I think that would be much better than the configuration they have right now.
I would be inclined to agree, not least because where B cap is now on the 5 line, 5 line, that is a notorious death alley in the early game. Move it over onto the 4-5 line, and you suddenly got that island in the middle of the cap circle. You've got a bit more cover. You've got this couple of escape channels if things do get hot. That becomes a lot more interesting as a brawling area for destroyers.
It's actually kind of, if they did that, it would be kind of like how they changed Trap to have the outlet channels in the B cap, which, by the way, I really like that they did that to Trap, because it makes going into B much more palatable.
Yes, they might have to stop calling it Trap, but that's another matter entirely. But
no, they just named that new map Trap that's got the A cap that's completely encircled.
Yeah, true enough. At some point, someone's going to name a map Bad Idea. But yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing that B cap move out of Suicide Alley and into the gap just to the west of it on the 4 line.
I think that... Kami, your point is also well taken because it would balance the map better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would give, I think, both teams an opportunity there, because the way the spawns are set up right now, it's kind of an interesting dynamic, because I just don't like, for a better reference, I mean, the map is, the way they have the caps kind of set up like a peepee and 2 balls, I mean, when
I can now look.
When you look at it, and I feel like it's not a good map design. Like, it feels unbalanced. It feels like the neutral objectives are now to a point where on a high, so a medium tier game where radar doesn't last as long and things like that, maybe it works, but at a high tier game, just how do you get into those caps? I mean, we know the trouble getting into them in ranked, let alone what are you going to do when there's 12? It's 12v12 in a high tier game. How do you get into? I mean, the caps are so small. I mean,
I think a possible answer to that might be that you don't, at least not to start with. You set up your kill boxes, and then the action shifts out to the flank as you try to dislodge the other side's kill box, and then you cap mid to late game. And that's a very counterintuitive play style.
But again, we're talking about slowing the game down on a map that's already slow.
Yeah, that is problematic.
Well, and we're not even talking about the big island that's dominated this map forever, the one right in the middle of the map. I mean, think about how many times you've seen, Des Moines, Minotaurs, they just push right up next to that island. And the minute you make a move for that cap, I mean, holy hell's unleashed on you. So it's, man, I guess we have a little bit that we can do to try to sway that, right? Like give our suggestions.
Yeah, we could give some
Absolutely.
suggestions.
I mean, and that's one of the things that shifting the B cap one channel west does, because that moves it clear, or at least partially clear, of the DM and the Minotaur's radar range. I think it might even get it out of the range of the Russians if they're behind the island on the 6-7 line.
I'm pretty. How big are the squares? They're either. Are they 4.8 kilometers? Are they 4.4?
If it's a 48 by 48, then yes, those are basically 4.8. So call it 5 for the sake of rounding. So a Chapayev or a Donskoy would sweep 2 and change. So depending on exactly where they were parked, the B cap, if moved, would still be within sweep, but you'd be probably clear of the Americans and the British. They'd have to choose between sweeping B or sweeping C.
Yeah, and I honestly feel like if they move that cap over, it would give both teams kind of an island to sit behind. Like you'd have the island, north of the cap and the island south of the cap where you could put ships and they could do it with their radar or whatever you wanted. But that also opens, if they sit there, it also opens, if you go to the 1, 2, or 3 line, you're going to get shots on those ships that are sitting there from both sides. So you wouldn't be safe sitting there trying to protect that cap. Whereas now you look at it, yes, you can still get that crossfire, but it's harder to spot things that sit behind the big island unless you have ships that are able to radar them or, get around on the flank. But the way it's proposed, there really isn't a reason to go over there because as the pre-capped caps. So,
yeah.
Well, the other problem with this map that's always been there, and it's most apparent and ranked to me anyway, is that the south side of this map has a better position in that big island than the north side. The south side can cover both the B and the C cap with one ship, and the north side can never do that.
Yeah, I mean, that asymmetry in the island has always been an issue. I've often wondered how it would play if they took that island and they basically moved it south about a quarter of a grid square.
That would, I don't even know. That would be Kami?
What if they just made every map ocean?
Oh, come on. That's what most navies fought over, but for some reason, people in this game don't approve of that idea. You mention ocean to most people, and what you get, once you take out all the obscenities, is basically no thank you, or I have a torch and a pitchfork.
Damn historical accuracies.
Absolutely.
No, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays, and hopefully we maybe can get the diamond shape developed. I mean, I think moving that cap over and then making it a diamond would honestly be better. Looking at the map, because I rarely look at the maps anymore because I've played them so many times, and I don't think about changes on what they could do to the maps other than this map being the D cap. Yeah. I've always said since this map came out, the D cap needs to be removed.
Well, they listened.
But maybe they did. But maybe there's a better suggestion for them on how to make it a better map, because this map has always been one of those maps, like Kalorn said, that it's been stagnant. A lot of teams just go sit by the BC caps and they just kind of sit there and duel back and forth. We have a few maps in the game like that, but this has definitely been probably the biggest.
Yeah, I mean,
this is the one that when you get ranked, I hate it.
Oh,
because you can never predict what's going to happen.
I'd say if you ever have a map design where the phrase "the first team to push loses" comes up in regular conversation, you have a problem with that map design.
Well, let's go get on to our last topic of the thing, because I think that's a good point to end on. And I think that, Kami, you do have a point. We should probably get a copy of the map and then put the circles on it where we were just talking about and throw that up for consideration, because I think that would be a really good suggestion. And I think better than the gentleman's sausage that they're all currently proposing.
Indeed.
The wiener and balls.
And if nothing else, we have just guaranteed that map is never going to see the light of day because no one's going to take it seriously. I I must admit, though, I would love to see heat maps for really all the maps. It would be brilliant to see that data and see where people are going in the aggregate.
I completely agree with that, Yuzral. And I'm sure that's actually something that they consider when they do these map design stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if they're not tracking that on server telemetry, they're missing a brilliant source of data.
So it's been a relatively light week in terms of news, and I think that might change going forward over the next week. So we'll have much more to talk about next week.
Oh boy!
But we'll close out with a discussion topic. And I think that Yuzral has proven his ability to make a lot out of nothing. But no, I'm kidding.
Oh, God. Yeah. What can I say?
But thus far, we've only had clan battles at tier 10 with some relatively severe restrictions on ship composition. I guess my question for Kami and for you, Yuzral, is do you think that we should have clan battles at a different tier? And if so, what tier should that be?
Kami, do you want to go first?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer would be 8, right? I mean, that's kind of the obvious answer in the sense of what everything else has been competitive. But I honestly would like to see. It's tough to say though because the balance at other tiers is different. You know, it's. But I would maybe like to see a tier that didn't have radar. You know, but then you start thinking, it's like, would you do tier 7? There's the Belfast and the Atlanta there. Would you do tier 6? What's the power level at tier 6? You know, so I mean, it's tough to think about what other tier they could do because it kind of like I feel like clan battles is like the end boss in the sense of this is what you spend all those time in randoms grinding for your ships, and this is how what you get to play. You know, where you get to play them. You know, it's kind of like the big boys playground in a sense. And I don't know if any of the other tiers would really do it justice. I mean, would playing at tier 7 clan battle be fun? Because I know how much everybody despised ranked at tier 7, you know, from the feedback that I received. So I don't know. It'd be tough to pick another tier, but I would have to say, I guess the obvious answer would be 8, just because that's where all the other competitive things would be. But I'm actually pretty happy it's at 10.
I think it's good for another season or two at 10. It's worth noting that King of the Seas meta shook up very considerably when they went from, ironically enough, 8 to 10 with this last run of the tournament. Problem is, once you go below tier 7, once you have no radar, or even at tier 7 where you have very limited radar, the meta goes smoke heavy and it goes passive because nobody really wants to be pushing into a boatload of torpedoes or several boatloads of torpedoes. Depends how many destroyers are running around. It's the battleships. Well, the change to the smoke meta might shift that because, of course, when we did have that season of ranked at tier 7 and the Belfasts and the Atlantas were just dominating everything, we had the old smoke firing rules, and those are now gone. So that may have the potential to put tier 7 back on the map in competitive. It may even put tier 6 back on the map because tier 6 battleship meta in particular is very, very interesting. You've got the 12 gun 14 inches, you've got the 8 gun 15 and 16 inches, you've got a lot of variety in the destroyers as well. So that's worth considering again. Tier 8, of course, classic competitive tier. Everyone knows the balance at the high levels. Everyone knows how the various ships play. Everyone knows how the ships interact. I kind of want to see what happens if you go tier 9, because everyone jumps 8-10. Tier 9 doesn't get much love on the competitive side.
I'm also a big proponent of tier 9 stuff. I've been clamoring.
Don't get them started.
Too late.
I've wanted a tier 9 ranked season for a long time, but I will let that one lie right there, Kami. But to ask my next question of you guys is, would changing the tier change their ability to allow carriers in clan battles? Because I think part of a big part of the reason that they didn't include carriers in clan battles at tier 10 is because they have too much power to be in a 7-on-7 match. But as you get down towards tier 6 in particular, but even tier 8 that you guys were talking about, they aren't as powerful. Like the AA to strike power ratio is different.
Tier 6, tier 7 maybe, because you've got a couple of very effective. Well, you start having a lot of fairly effective flak defense at tier 7, tier 6 with the Cleveland. I would not be a great fan of carriers purely because I'm thinking what would at tier 7, for example, if a Kaga got loose on a tier 7 game with a limited number of players and the enemy carrier couldn't handle it, then I could see that getting very ugly very quickly. Tier 8, of course, well, as we were saying earlier, Graf Zepp can quite happily handle tier 10 surface flak if she's well played. I mean, tier 8 surface flak, again, she's going to have some fun times at the enemy's expense. And even Enterprise and, actually all the tier 8 carriers, if they get a tier 8 match, they can have some pretty fun times at the enemy's expense. So I would be reluctant to let carriers back in at any tier. And honestly, maybe tier 6, because you've now got a few ships with well-established defensive fire to contain things, and it could work. But tier 7, tier 8, tier 9 with Taiho, and I think it's 2-3-2 setup, I can see that dominating if it's let loose on a 7v7.
CV dead class, don't you know that? Come on.
No, I must have missed that particular memo. Sorry, I am a semi-permanent adherent of the dark side.
Oh, wait, you're an EU guy, so you guys still have CVs. Wait, never mind.
Don't we? I missed that memo as well.
Other tiers, it's always tough, right? Like tier 7 you were talking about. I mean, the Saipans there. So
yep.
Good luck getting your strikes off if it's a competent Saipan.
And if it is a competent Saipan and the enemy Saipan isn't, well, I think we've all seen those mere 6 torpedo bombers pull 100k plus.
Yeah, and I just think 10 is kind of where it's at right now. And CVs in a 7v7, I don't know. I mean, I know we have CV listeners, but I'm sorry to say, but I just don't see the CV in a 7v7 being. I don't even know if the word's fair. I think it'd be more of, I guess balance, right? The way it would be.
So turning the question on its head for a second, Kami, you brought up that 7v7 is difficult to include a carrier. Would it be fair to clans to make it 9v9? Because, and the reason I'm asking this is that getting 7 people together is hard enough. If you're now required to get 9 people together so that we can have carriers, is that reasonable?
I mean, so there's 2 different mindsets to this, right? There's the true competitive mindset, and then there's the people that want to play clan battles for fun, quote unquote, right? I mean, you think of the tournament that just happened, the King of the Seas tournament. I mean, there was 64 teams from EU, and their sign up was like done very quickly the minute it went up. And NA still, I think, brought 49 teams, and something like that, 40 something teams, and they all had CVs of varying level of skill. The top teams have very skilled CVs. The bottom teams, they're okay. In the sense of clan battles, if you had to bring a CV and 8 other players every match, I mean, and you think about how CVs are right now, I mean, with randoms, I don't know how often you would get a match if some of the teams weren't playing that had competent CVs. You know what I mean? Like, it'd be tough. But I guess if you made enough announcements about it and you put it in so many places, you might get it. But right now, I mean, what are you going to do? Give people rental CVs? Teams rental CVs? That seems like a terrible idea, right?
That does seem like a terrible idea. I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point.
So I don't know.
I think the expression of that is, oh God, no. But the other issue with clans, of course, is the notion of prime time. And that does not help the situation with getting a team together at all, at least in my very limited experience. As you say, I just think the carriers in clans at the moment is just not going to work because there's too much hinging on that one player. And the smaller you make the teams, the worse that problem gets.
Yeah, it would honestly be tough. Now, it's going to be interesting to see what the feedback is from, King of Sea? Did they like the carrier? Did they didn't like, because that's really the thing that we got to go on, right? If they were to allow carriers in clan battles, I think carriers in a 7v7 is too much, but if they were to make it a 9v9 in clan battles with carriers, hey, maybe that's a thing. And when you think about it, if a carrier, teams would have to spec their ships completely differently. I mean, there's a lot to go into it with a carrier. And I feel like the way carriers are right now, there's been talk of this rework coming forever. I'll believe it when I see it, or when pigs fly, whichever comes first.
Well, we're talking carriers, so hey, you get me a pig. I've got a steam catapult on the deck. It's just one of those things. I mean, the carrier rework, I think, is going to have to be so drastic. It's going to be almost a ground-up rebuild right from first concept. But who knows? Well,
and the maps would, I think, there'd be so much that you'd have to go into to make it different. Now what I could see is, a changing of, maybe another battleship or something of that nature, changing it up, maybe making it, I don't know. They're kind of like the King of the Sea format, where it was 2 battleships and other ships, and maybe that's the way to go. I don't know, but clan battles as it is right now, I think are pretty fun the way it is, and unless you plan on making drastic changes and letting people know about it, I think you'd have to just make minor ones. Maybe I don't know if jumping straight from 7v7, no carrier, 1 battleship, to 9v9, 1 CV, 1 battleship, bunch of other stuff, if that's the way to do it, because that's a huge change. You're adding in 2 more ships, one of them being a carrier. There's a lot that can happen, and there's a lot that we can go through it. I think we just need to see how it goes, and but 7v, I would definitely say no to 7v7 with a carrier,
at least until the carriers got reworked. If assuming that would change,
and assuming how they change the carriers. I mean, this is a whole different can of worms, carriers, right? And we've had Fair on here, we've had Fim, and they've talked about what they'd like to see. But my whole thing with carriers is a carrier in a good player's hand in a random game can dominate the game. But in a competitive setting, a carrier is really a spotting bot, in the sense of how much damage do they really do? I mean, I casted and watched a lot of the King of the Sea, and I can tell you maybe a handful of times I saw carriers actually do any damage at all. But I saw a lot of times where they were shooting down 45, 50, 60 planes. So it's really tough to say in an organized format how much striking a carrier can do. I think it is the biggest thing. And I think Farah talked about it a lot when we had Farah on here. But that would be the interesting thing to see. But right now, the way carriers are and the way people, I think there's like a stigma on carriers. Kind of like, you're either a really good damage farming carrier or you're a really good competitive carrier, but they kind of don't mix. And I don't know. And it's tough because you have the people that say, oh, that person is a really, really good midway player because they average 180,000 damage. But you put that player into a competitive scene and they get farmed by a Haku. That's air superiority. So, there's a lot of variation that goes into it. I think we need to see what they do with carriers before we start talking about carriers in a wargaming made, competitive, not King of the Sea. I know wargaming supports King of the Sea, but that's also player ran. So there's a lot of things that can go right and wrong with carriers.
Yuzral, you have any follow up to that, or?
Not really. I mean, it's pretty much what Kami has said is my thoughts on the matter as well. In 7v7, 1 carrier just has too much leverage, matters too much. I mean, even in 12v12 in randoms, we've all seen it where 1 carrier's outclassed the other and it's just been a total stomp. So if 11 surface players have trouble, 6 are just going to go, no thank you. And even 8 at pro levels where the carriers are mostly, Kami said, spotting bots. Well, if you take that down into clans where perhaps people start shifting over to the damage roll, especially at low tiers. Again, the carrier is going to have a disproportionate influence, and it's going to be 1 carrier driver. Oh, yeah, and he's got 8 meat shields to protect him. Carriers are in an odd place at the moment in competitive. They work completely differently to the way they do in random, as we saw in King of the Seas. We often see in high tier ranked and clans as well, especially up in the Typhoon League. the big elephant in the room is the rumored, discussed, speculated rework. And until that's sorted, I think making any major changes to carriers and clans would be premature.
So I want to give you a wild card as the absolute last question for you, Yuzral, because
Okay.
you're from the UK, right?
Yep.
We have had new lines of every ship type in the game since launch, except carriers. We've had some premium carriers out of the game, but we've not had an entire new line of carriers added to the game. And there's only one nation that you could really put an entire line of carriers together.
The Royal Navy.
Indonesia.
Tommy. Do you see them putting together a Royal Navy carrier line in the next couple of years? Or do you think that that's something that they will not touch because they're not happy with carriers at all?
I think it is something that they will not touch until they are happy where the carrier gameplay is, because, again, they got some flack, pun intended, mostly, when they said, okay, we're going to do a carrier rework, and then they put out Kaga and Graf Zeppelin, and people started saying, hey, hang on a second, weren't you meant to be reworking the whole carrier line? So I don't think we're going to see that much. Would I like to see the British carriers in game? Oh, yes, because British carrier design took some very different approaches to American and Japanese. The British, I believe, went for armored decks a lot quicker than the other nations did. And they were quite happy to trade off hangar capacity for that. And, of course, British aircraft were also, interestingly, different. People were using the Swordfish well after its
Give me that swordfish.
retired.
Against the Sharpets!
Yes.
Or Bismarck.
Yeah, and that's very noticeable. But I would like to see the line eventually, but I think carrier gameplay has to be gotten into a better place first. Otherwise, they're going to do the line, they're going to balance it, and then they're just going to have to do it all over again if they do a ground-up rework of the carriers. But the British line has the potential to be highly unusual, with the armoured decks and the lower hangar capacities and some interesting planes. Maybe they'll do something different with the planes, for example, introducing the notion of perhaps a fighter bomber, something that carries a small low-power bomb but can also defend itself in a dogfight like a normal fighter. But I think we're going to see the rework first, if we ever do.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Colin. And I know there was a talk a while ago about, when are they going to bring in British carriers? And to me, I'm glad they haven't, because of the way, the carriers, they've always talked about the rework. And I think it'd be foolish for them to bring in a new line of carriers, like Yuzral said, before they balance out carriers to begin with. But yeah, British carriers are definitely different than the other nations. I think how many planes did the Ark Royal carry?
If she was breaking 50, I'd be surprised. Yeah. But that's only a top of my head number.
And then you have Glorious that died to Scharnhorst and Gneisenau.
Glorious could get interesting, actually, because, of course, there was her earlier incarnation as the large
as a battle cruiser?
Well, officially, I believe she was a large light cruiser.
With the 457, right?
It was something ridiculous, like, I think it was either 2 457s on what was basically a light cruiser hull.
Yeah, that was basically it.
Jackie Fisher got interesting towards the end of his career. But let me just double check, because HMS Ark Royal 71 hangar capacity right. So her aircraft load at the start of the war was apparently 26 Swordfish and 24 Skewers. So 50 planes.
That's going to go down as soon as you try and put any other. If you put like the more modern ones, take up a lot more room. Well, the other thing that you have to now I'm going off on a deep end that I probably shouldn't, but the reason that the U.S. and the Japanese carriers carried so many more planes than the British carriers did is because British carriers stored all of their planes internally, and the American and the Japanese used deck parks where they would leave the planes on the deck during the weather when they weren't flying.
Indeed. And there was a case where, infamously the USS Robin, as she was, adopted deck parking despite being a British design. And I think they could get more on. In fact, Graf Zepp has had some generous massaging of her hangar capacity as well.
Yeah, she would have to be using deck parks. There's no way that you would get the number of planes that we have on Graf Zeppelin without deck parks.
Indeed. So I think they've kind of set the precedent there for the British carriers to say, okay, well, if we adjust doctrine so that they have deck parks, okay, that's another 20% on the aircraft.
Well, and you look, okay, so the Illustrious, which was, commissioned in May of 1940, had a hangar capacity of 36. And where would that go? If you were to look at comparative timelines, I mean, you would kind of put that at tier 7 or 8, right?
In terms of relative timelines,
but how would you?
But the timelines are all over the place.
But
carrier design.
if you just go strictly off of carriers of that same area, the Enterprise, the Shokaku, it would.
You're actually talking more like tier 9, Kami, because the Lexington and the Ranger, those are both 1920s, 1930s designs.
Well, if you take, all right, if you're going to give someone a tier 9 with 36 planes, you tell me how many people are going to play that. You know what I mean?
Well, there's a problem in this regard, because if you're going to base tier off commissioning dates, well, okay, Saipan was a post-war carrier, I believe. Kaga was originally a 1920s design, along with Ranger. This is one of those occasions where Wargaming are just taking some very, very generous liberties with the history book in an effort to keep everything balanced.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of interesting things that will come up if we see Royal Navy carriers in the game. That was one that just kind of occurred to me at the end of the cast here, and I wanted to throw that out there, just a little, a little fun speculation.
Absolutely, but yeah, I mean, you can kick off at tier 4 with Hermes. You've got some extremely famous ships like Ark Royal, Illustrious. You've even got a couple of relative oddballs, things like HMS Unicorn, for example, which was more of a aircraft repair ship than a carrier. In fact, I don't think she ever actually launched her planes in anger historically. But as you said, the Royal Navy was the only other navy, aside from the Americans and the Japanese, to operate a full carrier fleet and have enough designs to fill the line. So we will see them. It's just a case of, well, hopefully they'll sort out carrier gameplay before they try putting them in.
And I think it's likely that is why we haven't seen them. I mean, that really is the only reason why you wouldn't do it, unless they're having trouble with the actual design drawings, which I know that was the stated reason it took so long to get Royal Navy battleships, is that they did the British government wouldn't give them access to them.
The Ministry of Defense is very, very twitchy about letting anything defense related anywhere near Russia for some reason. Can't imagine why.
Well,
I have no idea why you're
going to build new battleships.
Well, the way it's kind of an interesting thing that keeps coming back to me with the development of railguns. In the last 300 years, we've gone from hurling lumps of iron at each other to explosive shells to armor-piercing shells to all the weird and wonderful stuff like Hesh and Heat. And now with the railgun, we're back to throwing lumps of iron at each other.
Albeit at a slightly higher velocity.
A little bit.
Yes. And also smaller lumps of iron. But honestly, I mean, if we're going back there, I can see the notion of the direct fire gunboat coming back into vogue, particularly if stealth tech gets to the point where missile locks suddenly aren't reliable anymore. So there's an interesting notion that warship design has just taken a 300-year circle, and we're now back to the old technologies.
and we have officially gone off the deep end of the podcast.
Oh yeah, my work here is done.
Well, we really want to thank you for being on the show with us, Yuzral, and it was good to have you back, and good to talk to you again. Is there any kind of shout outs that you wanted to do before we close it down?
Oh, right. Well, if we want to blatant plugging and advertising, Twitter is @Yuzral, YouTube channel is youtube.com/Yuzral, and my Twitch channel is twitch.tv/Yuzral. Yes, I'm an imaginative guy, I know. All kinds of weird and wonderful names. But yeah, that's pretty much all the shameless advertisements I wanted to run. I don't know about you guys.
Kami, you have anything coming up on your stream? I know you just got back. You were streaming in yesterday, right?
Yeah, nothing that I know of yet.
Fair enough. Alrighty, well, that's it for this week, folks. Remember, our podcast episodes are now going to be released on YouTube with listener gameplay as backdrop, or my gameplay if I run out of it. If you guys have a spectacular game and would like to be featured on the YouTube, please drop us an email at warshipspodcast@gmail.com with your replay, screenshots of the end battle screen, and a brief summary of the game. Also, if you would like to just record it and send it to me on Dropbox or something, that makes my life a lot easier. I would really appreciate that. As always, follow us on Facebook and Twitter for updates between podcasts. We, of course, want to thank our amazing Patreon backers. If you're interested in supporting us, please consider becoming a Patreon backer yourself. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.